This week's project is going to start with this cherry branch. It's not very big around, it's quite long, but I'm going to turn a bowl out of it. And it's going to address one of the most asked questions that I get when I turn. So stay tuned and see what I do with it. So the first step that I did was I cut the ends off. It was much longer than what I needed, plus the ends were checked a little bit. And also the bark was not in very good shape. So you can see here that I ended up peeling the bark off. But please stay tuned and see what I end up doing with this large branch. So here I have a branch, effectively. It's 3 or 4 inches in diameter, and it's 18 inches long, which is the max of my lathe. Matter of fact, it's actually making just a slight bit of contact, just can hear it right there, but I won't be there for long. But just to address a question that I get asked most often is how I can turn air, whether that be a burl that's got a piece missing, or this is a real extreme. I'm going to make contact here with this wood right here where it comes around, but then I'm not going to make contact again until this piece comes around. And even then, this piece isn't going to make contact because this is so much closer. So this is only going to make contact every time around, once around. So the secret on this is speed. The faster you can turn this, you can imagine if it's turning this fast right here. Let me turn it on. If I was turning this fast and I had a tool here and I pushed in to make contact, if I'm pushing, I could easily push in while that's spinning air. Whereas if I'm turning it this fast, obviously the chance of me being able to push into air is a lot less. And if I can speed that up, that's going to get even better. So the faster I can turn this, the better off I'm going to be. And again, when I'm turning, it's not so bad. I'm holding my tool on my tool rest. I'm holding my tool on the tool rest here, and I'm not really pushing. I'm just bringing it in slowly till it makes contact, and then I can control it right here with this hand how far it goes in. So I'm not constantly trying to push it in. So turning isn't as bad as sanding. Sanding is a lot worse. It's a lot harder to control. It's a lot harder to control that when sanding. But let's go ahead and get turning and see how we make out. As you can see, the bark had all come off. It was not going to stay on. It actually was a bit rotted, so it came right off. But the wood itself looks solid. So let's go ahead and we'll get started to turn. Now, before I turn on the lathe, one important thing to do is to spin it by hand, especially when it's a shape that's not uniform, to make sure that I'm not going to hit the tool rest. You don't want to turn this on and then find out that you got your tool rest too close. We're looking here at what's going to be the bottom of this bowl, so I'm just going to come in here slowly and start nibbling away at the underside of this stick. So off camera, I did a little more turning, as you can see here. You can also see that I've started to form the tenon on the bottom of the bowl, which I'll later use when I flip it around. On this underside of the bowl, I used a combination of my bowl gouge to remove the majority of the material, and then switch to my scraper to make it a bit smoother. You can see here now it's shaped fairly well. The underside is starting to look like a bowl. It's got that slow uniform shape out to the rim. At this point, I'm ready to do some hand sanding. Now, I'm starting with, I believe, 120 grit, so it doesn't actually change the shape significantly, and I want to keep it moving so that I have, again, those flowing shapes. Sanding can be difficult with this shape. It will tend to catch a little bit more than what the tool would have. Now with the sanding complete, I'll apply a sanding sealer to this, which will just help seal the wood, and I'll also then go back with and sand it one more time after the sanding sealer has dried up. So now I have the bowl flipped around, and you're looking at what will be the inside of the bowl, and I'm holding it with that tenon that I showed earlier. So the first thing I do again is just spin it by hand, make sure that I'm not going to make contact with my tool rest, and then start turning. At first, I use my carbide tool just to establish the thickness of the edge. And you can see here I stop it frequently just to check. Once I get that edge established, then I'll switch to my bowl gouge and try and get close to the final thickness here near the top rim of the bowl. And typically what I want to do is work the outside as much as possible, leaving a mass of material in the center. That just helps the wood remain more stable. If you remove all of the center at the beginning, then you could get more flexing on the edge, especially where this piece is so long. So here I just start at the outside rim of the bowl and continue working in towards the center. I stop frequently to check the thickness, and I make sure that every time I stop, I approach with my tool very cautiously and take very, very light cuts. Now that the wings are a fairly uniform thickness, I'm going to start working at removing the center core of this bowl. For this, again, I used a combination of my carbide tool as well as my bowl gouge. Two things here in this picture. In the top left hand corner, you can see that I did get a little bit of chip out, which I'll later fix as I enhance the edge, and you'll see that. The other thing is, with this type of bowl, it's very easy to see how thick it is and how uniform it is because you can easily see that along the side of the bowl. I like this overhead shot. You can see fairly easily what's going on. You almost get a look inside the bowl. So I'm using my bowl gouge, and you can tell by the angle that I'm riding the bevel of the gouge. So that is the surface on the underside of the gouge. I follow the wood down, and that's going to give you your best shape when you're riding that bevel. It's also the easiest to control. The only thing that I do have to be careful of is make sure that my hands never go in front of the tool rest, my hands or my arm. I also switch to my scraper in between the bowl gouge. I go to my scraper, and that gives me a nice smooth surface. Once I'm done that, I just work on this centerpiece, nibble it down till it's very, very small, and then I can just break it off and then clean it up. So I do have a spot right here that I'm going to have to fix. And I was close to the pith and it cracked a bit, and then when it did, a piece broke out. So my idea here to fix this is to cut it down. I can't do it with the lathe turning because then it'll end up with a very flat surface. That's not what I'm looking for. So I'm going to sand it down, take this shoulder down, shape it so it looks a little bit more natural. Same thing here. I'm going to bring these edges down a little bit, make it look a little more natural. Just clean that up a bit. Remember before I said that I wanted to sand the edges on the outside? Turns out I used my jigsaw actually, because there was a fair bit of material to remove to get rid of that piece that had broken out by the pith, and also just to take away that square edge that I had. Once I finished with that, I used my torch to burn that edge because that edge was white and it didn't match very well with what was on the sides. It turns out that burning the two ends, match very well against the wood where the bark had been removed. And here you can see I just went over that edge very lightly, but that was already quite black. It was a little bit rotting from where the bark was. So by going over it with the torch, it just evened everything up and actually ended up to be a nice fit for the natural edge. Remember earlier I said that it's easier to cut a shape like this than it is to sand. You can sand, and here you can see obviously I'm sanding on the inside. I find the inside a bit easier than the outside. But the thing you want to do when sanding this, obviously go as fast as you can. But the other thing is you want to angle the sanding disc so that you're only hitting on the trailing edge, not the leading edge. If you hit the leading edge of the disc, it will tend to just tear the sandpaper off. Here I'm putting on the finish. In this case, I'm going to use wipe on poly for this. This is the first time on this channel, at least, that I've shown wipe on poly. It does give a nice glossy finish, although some people don't like it because it appears plasticky. But I think on this piece, it was the right choice. So I'm going to end up putting the first coat on with it on the lathe. And here I rub it on both sides and on the edges. But then I'll remove it from the lathe, remove the tenon that I have on the bottom, and then continue to apply the wipe on poly until I put on about 5 or 6 coats, and that should give me a really nice finish. You've seen me do this on my channel before if you're a regular viewer. I just have a friction drive here. I've got the bowl reverse mounted up against a block, and the tailstock is engaged applying pressure so that, again, the only thing that's causing this bowl to turn is the friction. And then I'll just cut away the tenon that I had on the bottom of the bowl that was inside the chuck, and I'll just keep nibbling away at it, making sure that the majority of the pressure is towards the motor away from the tailstock so that I'm pushing it into the friction drive as opposed to pushing with a sideways load where it could come off. Once I've got it down to just a small nub, I'll stop it there and then just remove the rest of it by sanding. Now you can see the underside of this bowl. You can see that I've embellished it, left a small rim around the outside for the bowl to set on, and completely removed the tenon All that's left now is a small nub, which I'll just remove by sanding. Once that's done and I've finished applying the coating, then I'll laser engrave my logo on the bottom. So here's a finished product. It's about 4 inches wide and about 16 inches long. I also mentioned earlier that I wasn't in my workshop as much as I'd like to be lately, and here's the reason why. We've got a new puppy, and I've forgotten just how much work a new puppy is. You have to watch them all the time, but still enjoying it just the same. So here's the finished product, proof that you can turn something that's mostly air. And I think it turned out very well. This bowl is for sale, but it's actually going to be featured in an online auction for the Valey Christian Academy. I'll put a link to this video, and please check it out. Thank you for watching.